Sparta versus Athens. In our last video, we talked about the isolation of the city-states, which was different than any other areas because they identified themselves as not as being Greece, but by their individual city-state. There were city-states that were neutral. There were city-states that were entities all unto themselves and had an allegiance to one of two groups. So the first group was the Delian League, which was sponsored by the Athenians, and the second was the Peloponnesians, which was who was in charge was the Spartans. They were the largest group. So we want to take a look at the differences between Sparta and Athens, and then we'll see sort of what happened over time. So Athens and Sparta were both Greek cities, and they were only about 150 miles apart, yet they were really different. Part of the answer is geography. Athens is in central Greece, only 4 miles from the Aegean Sea. Its location encouraged Athenians to look outwards towards the world beyond the city. Athenians liked to travel. They were eager to spread their own ideas and learn from others. They encouraged artists from other parts of Greece to come and share their knowledge of art and architecture. And Athens developed strong relationships with other city-states and grew into a large and powerful, thorough trading network. A great fleet made it the leading naval power in Greece. In contrast, Sparta was more isolated. It was located on a plain between the mountains and the sea in the part of Greece known as the Peloponnesus. Spartans were suspicious of outsiders and their ideas. They grew much of what they needed in the fertile soil around Sparta. What they couldn't grow, they often took from their neighbors through the power of their armies. While Athenians boasted of their art and culture, Sparta valued strength and simplicity. They taught their sons and daughters to fight, and they produced soldiers rather than artists and thinkers. For most of their histories, the two city-states were rivals, and as you can see, their differences were reflected in every part of life. So we're going to look at this a little bit more, and we're going to look at it through a lens of 4 different areas and compare and contrast between the two. So we're going to look at government, economy, education, and women and slaves. Okay, in both civilizations, women were not considered citizens. So here we go. This is the Athenian social structure. So at the top, citizens, freemen, had full citizenship and rights. They were divided into subclasses based on their wealth. And then there were the metics, men who were not born in Athens, were not allowed to own land, but could run businesses. And then there were slaves. There was a third of the population had no rights and owned by their masters in deaths. Helots were also the soldiers, and they were not considered any great group in Athens. So Athens became a democracy around 500 BC, but unlike modern democracies, Athens only allowed free men to be citizens. All men over the age of 18 who were born in Athens were Athenian citizens. Women and slaves were not citizens. Every citizen could take part in the city's government. A group called the Council of 500 met every day. Each year, the names of all citizens 30 years of age or older were collected, and 500 of those names were chosen. The council ran the day-to-day businesses of government and suggested new laws. Proposed laws had to be approved by a much larger group, the Assembly. The Assembly met on a hill every 10 days. At least 6,000 citizens had to be present for a meeting to take place. If not enough people showed up, slaves would round up more citizens with ropes dipped in red paint. Men were embarrassed to appear at the meeting with their clothes stained with red marks. The assembly debated and voted on laws proposed by the council. Every citizen had the right to speak at assembly meetings. Some speakers were more skilled than others. Some spoke longer than others, and sometimes a water clock was used to time the speakers. 1 cup of water was set above another, and the first cup had a small hole drilled in the bottom. The speaker could talk only until the water ran out of the top cup and into the bottom cup. That might be a good idea in class sometimes, right? Most Athenian men enjoyed taking part in the city's democracy. They liked to gather and debate the issues. They were proud of their freedom as Athenian citizens. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Athenian economy. An important part of life in any community is its economy. An economy is the way a community or region organizes the manufacture and exchange of money, food, products, and services. The Athenian economy was based on trade. The land around Athens did not provide enough food for all of the city's people, but Athens was near the sea and it had a good harbor. So Athenian trade with other city-states and some foreign lands to get the goods and natural sources they needed. They acquired wood from Italy and grain from Egypt. In exchange, Athenians traded honey, olive oil, silver, and beautifully painted pottery. Athenians bought and sold goods at a huge marketplace called the Agora. There, merchants sold their goods from small stalls. People bought lettuce, onion, olive oil, wine, and other foods. They could also buy household items like pottery, furniture, and clay oil lamps. Most Athenians made their clothes at home, but leather, sandals, and jewelry were popular items at the market. In addition, Athenians bought and sold slaves at the Agora. Like most city-states, Athens developed its own coins to make trade easier. Coins were made of such metals as gold, silver, bronze, Athenians decorated the flat side of their coins. One of their coins had an image of the goddess Athena, who is the head, the patron saint of Athens, and the other side pictured Athena's favorite bird, the owl. Okay. Education in Athens. Athens' democracy depended on having good citizens. Athenians believed that producing good citizens was the main purpose of education. Since only boys grew up to be citizens, boys and girls were educated very differently. Athenians believed that a good citizen had a sharp mind and a healthy body, so education meant physical training as well as book learning. Until age 6 or 7, boys were taught at home by their mothers or male slaves. From age 6 to 14, boys went to school. Teachers taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and literature. Books were rare and very expensive, so subjects were read out loud and the boys had to memorize everything. To help them learn, they used writing tablets. Coaches taught sports such as wrestling and gymnastics to strengthen students' muscles. Boys also studied music, and they learned to sing and play the lyre. At 18, Athenian men began their military training. After their service, wealthy young men might study with private teachers. These teachers charged high fees for lessons in debate and public speaking that would help young men become political leaders. Unlike boys, most girls did not learn to read or write. Girls grew up helping their mothers around the house. They were taught to cook, clean, spin thread, and weave clothes. Some also learned ancient secret songs and dances for religious festivals. Girls usually married around the age of 15, and those from wealthy families married men chosen by their fathers. Girls from poor families often had more choice. Women and slaves in Athens. As you've already learned, only men were considered citizens in Athens. Women and slaves were not, and as a result, they had far fewer rights than free men did. Athenian women could not inherit or own much property. They could not vote or attend the assembly. Some could not even choose their own husbands. A few women had jobs. Some women sold goods in the market, and a few very important women became priestesses or female priests. But most Athenian women had their greatest influence in the home. They spent their day managing the household and bringing up their children. An Athenian wife had separate rooms at home and never went out alone. She would spin, weave, and supervise the slaves. She educated her sons until they were 6 or 7 and ready for school. She taught her daughters until they were 15 and ready to be married. There were many slaves in ancient Athens. Most people who weren't poor owned at least one slave. Some slaves were born into slavery, and others became slaves when they were captured in wars. Slaves performed a wide variety of jobs in Athens, including the tasks that required a great deal of skill. Some slaves ran households and tutored Athenian children, and a number of slaves were trained as craftsmen. Others worked in farms or factories. Some slaves worked for the city as clerks. The unluckiest slaves worked in the silver mines. They might work 10 hours a day in cramped tunnels 300 feet below the surface. They had little air to breathe and were often whipped when they rested.